you for joining us on the annual forum. My name is David Plunkett and I'm lucky to be the Chief Executive of Eastern Health and the Chair of the North East Melbourne Integrated Cancer Service. Our keynote address today, I'm very excited to say, is about maximising impact, sustaining cancer care in challenging times, and we're certainly in those. And Alison Coughlan is very kindly joining us to be able to give us this address. Alison has a research and public health background and is a speaker, author and facilitator and coach who builds the capabilities of individuals and teams in the health and social sectors. Alison's work is informed by almost 30 years' experience working at a state, national and global level with more than 75 organisations as a researcher, policymaker, advocate, leader, consultant and board director. And Alison, you'll have to share with us what you do in your spare time. Alison's work also draws on her experience in reaching, sustaining and recovering from burnout, after which she charted a new, more fulfilling and sustainable path for her work and her life. And I think that that is oh so relevant to all of us in the health and social industries at this present point in time. For the rest of Alison's career, she intends to share what she has learned with others to help them optimise the impact they make, and in doing so, do their best work and live their best lives. Alison's book, The Health Hazard, Take Control, Restore Wellbeing and Optimise Impact, was published in March this year. And congratulations on your book being published, Alison. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's forum, and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. It's interesting just to reflect on that bio. You know, no wonder I ended up with burnout, really. It's a bit exhausting just to hear it, which is part of the challenge when we're doing purpose-driven work, and we're very dedicated to the work that we do, of course. So I'm going to draw on those experiences to talk to you today. And I guess, first of all, I just wanted to go back to the start of 2015, and at that time, I found myself utterly and completely face down. I was exhausted, I was incredibly emotional, and I was absolutely and completely burnt out. And I wondered at the time if I would ever actually recover. And I'd certainly lost all sort of trust in myself and confidence at the time. A lot of the time, I felt complete and utter despair, and the rest of the time I felt completely numb. But this wasn't where I thought I should be, right? Because I'd done all the right things. I'd had a 20+ year career at that stage in the health and social sectors. I'd held and enjoyed success in leadership roles and had been a much trusted and valued consultant. And people would describe me as having superhero qualities and say, "You're amazing, I don't know how you do it." My story was about hard work and sacrifice because that's what I thought it should be. That's what I thought, you know, being a good person doing good work meant. I was in service to my family and to my sector and to my work. And this was all aligned with this purpose that I'd had since I was a young girl around wanting to make a difference in my work and in my life. And I routinely went above and beyond to deliver meaningful outcomes on that hamster wheel, pedaling away like a mad woman. Now, there were times in previous years that I would describe as acute episodes of burnout where I would fall off that wheel. Maybe a death in the family, a period of conflict at work, a project I'd put my heart and soul into that didn't go anywhere. There were plenty of those. Pressures and challenges at home, there were plenty of those as well. And each time I would take a time out, I would lick my wounds and restore myself somewhat, and I would hop right back on that hamster wheel again. Now, as 2014 was coming to a close, I was really sliding. I was the CEO of a national charity, and we'd undergone some really exciting and transformational change in the previous couple of years. And at the time, I'd worked through months of really high activity, of travel and demands at work, and in parallel, some really sustained pressure and emerging conflict that I was managing whilst I kept pedaling away, madly delivering on all the things that we'd committed to. And just when I thought I'd had a small win, something else would happen. And the way I describe it really is like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and we've got the fireworks going off, and the Beethoven Symphony is reaching its crescendo, and the fireworks are getting more and more impressive. as the music reached its fever pitch, and it was challenge after challenge going off. One of those fireworks in December of that year was my daughter's appendix bursting, and would you believe that seven nights of sleeping in a chair in the Royal Children's felt like some kind of respite to the things that were happening outside those walls. And the fireworks finale came in late December when I left the organisation that I was working in, an extraordinary team and community that I cared for deeply. But unlike the other times I fell off the hamster wheel, this was different. This time I was face down, and there certainly wasn't any bouncing back. I was the primary breadwinner in my family, and I actually had to recover. Now, I'd like to say that my story of recovery doesn't start with some dramatic declaration of self-compassion or light bulb moment where I saw the error of my ways. It came from a place of basic need. So I needed to be okay, otherwise I was going to be no good to anyone. And so the first decision I made was to start taking care of myself. And my other decision, which was critical, was that I was never going to let this happen again. So I didn't know how to recover, but I had to learn, and that was what I set my mind to, and all the skills that I had accumulated in my career so far were directed towards this pursuit. Now, I read everything. I watched many TED Talks. I looked at the evidence. If anyone suggested something, I tried it because I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And as soon as I started to grow my energy and well-being, there were extraordinary experiences where I was able to shift really unhealthy mindsets, give up on unhealthy habits, make bolder, braver choices than I'd made before, and created this cascade effect: more energy, more time, more presence, more joy, more focus, a virtuous cycle in action, the absolute polar opposite of the vicious cycle that had been in play and that I'd been stuck in for many years. And a vicious cycle that I now recognise had ensured that it was inevitable that I was going to be face down at some point, because I'd made a completely unsustainable set of choices, probably throughout my life actually, until that point.
Alison, your slides aren't on slideshow at the moment, just letting you know.
Oh, truly? They are on my... I beg your pardon. Let me just try and reshare. I beg your pardon. Okay, this one. I'm sorry about that. Can you see them now?
Perfect. That's great.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. There we go. Now, wait a minute. Let me just go back. There we go. So what I certainly didn't expect from this whole experience is that it would lead to me talking to you today about burnout, and that it would be mark a completely different direction for my work. So along the path to my recovery, I was doing consultancy work again. I was doing good work, but there was this growing tension for me because I was working with teams and individuals across the health and social sector who were just not okay. And it felt like this elephant in every room that I was walking into, and I just couldn't unsee it with, I guess, the new lens that I was looking at this with from my own experience. I'd started to share my story in talks and one-on-one with clients, and every time I did, it was met with a sense of great relief by people who were really struggling and who had thought that they were alone in their experience, and it was certainly something that they should hide. This is what prompted me to then develop a workshop, first of all, on the topic, and later to write the book that David mentioned, as I could see that this was a conversation that we needed to have, and there was a contribution I could make here. So this image in this slide is from a blog post that I wrote about kintsugi, which is an ancient Japanese art of repairing broken pottery using a special resin and gold. So rather than using, adhesive that you can't see to hide the cracks, it was about celebrating the cracks and creating a product afterwards that is completely unique and far more beautiful than the original product. So it's a powerful symbol for me, and I guess I had thought that my experience was something that I should hide, and had wondered how it would affect my reputation if people knew, but the opposite has actually in fact been true. So it reflects this shift that you heard in the bio that I've chosen to take in my work, which is now dedicated to focusing on building resilience in the health and social sectors. And I'd like to share some insights with you today that I learnt along the way as I did the research for my book, and which really shone a whole new light on my own circumstances and that on the circumstances within which we work in the health and social sectors. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the use of the term resilience. So I get a lot of pushback on the use of this term by people who say, aren't we actually just the most resilient people in any workforce anyway? This surely can't be about us being more resilient as individuals. So this also resonated strongly. A couple of weeks ago, I attended an Ending Physician Burnout Global Summit, the first. And this sense of, you know, we feel like we're being blamed for the problem about us not being resilient enough, or about us not finding more time to take care of ourselves and all of those sorts of things. So I wanted to just address that. I will use the term resilience. I think it's an incredibly important term. But when I'm talking about resilience, I'm not talking about a personality trait. I'm talking about a state. So this is about an individual's capacity in any moment to manage the everyday stress of work and remain healthy, adapt and learn from unexpected setbacks and prepare for the future challenges proactively. So this is not just about a personality type or an innate sense of resilience. It's about your interaction with your environment, with the challenges that you have within your workplace, with the people that you're interacting with the circumstances of your work. The other term is burnout. So this was first characterised in healthcare workers in 1974. It took another 45 years for this to be recognised formally in the ICD as an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. What I've witnessed and experienced is chronic workplace stress as the norm, not the exception in our sectors. And let's just dig a little deeper there. So there are 3 hallmarks of burnout, or symptoms of burnout: emotional exhaustion, emotional, physical and mental exhaustion, feeling drained and fatigued; depersonalisation, a withdrawal or a distancing, which might manifest as a sense of detachment or callousness, indifference, negativity, a loss of empathy, a sense of apathy or cynicism; and reduced emotional control. We just get cranky, more reactive emotionally. Reduced personal efficacy, so a loss of confidence in our competence and sense of accomplishment. We might feel inept, or it might precipitate a loss of drive for us in our work. Decreased function and reduced effectiveness. So you can see how these symptoms can contribute to this vicious cycle in action. Often this can be described as something that creeps up on us after many years of decline, but then manifests with great force, and that certainly resonates for me. Now, there's been many studies that have been published over time, and the prevalence in the studies that I've looked at ranged from 17 to 52%. It's important to recognise that this is pre-COVID. Most of the studies report around the 35% mark, and you can see that represented by the matches in this slide. And it flows through both in direct and indirect roles. So when we are passionately connected to the purpose that is represented by our work, we are at risk of burnout. A global study during the pandemic has shown rates in 16 countries at just over 50%. Now, of course, we could consider this the tip of the veritable iceberg, really. Job stress and fatigue rates are higher. It leads to all sorts of things in terms of attrition, people who are considering leaving their careers, people who are unable to return to work. And then at its extreme, distress and anxiety and suicidal ideation and attempts. So in our health sector, being at double the population, it's been shown both in the US and in Australia, and also challenges there around stigma and challenges around mental health concerns within our sectors. So feeling like it's not okay to not be okay. In sectors, people research that has shown people seeking secret healthcare because they believe that if it was known that they were vulnerable, that there would be damage to their career and their personal reputation. The sustained physical, emotional and psychological demands of our work are literally destroying lives. Very alarmingly, in that global summit a couple of weeks ago, there was one of the presenters was talking about medical students in the US, and they need 3 intakes each year just to replace the young people who are taking their own lives. These are medical students, interns and registrars. It's a critical and very, very serious problem. So I'd like to now share with you 3 principles that have arisen from this work. The first is that we need to actively reject the concept of burnout as inevitable in our health and social sectors. We must consider it a serious health and safety issue. And the only path ahead that we should aspire to in the health and social sectors is one where we remain resilient and achieve impact. That's resilience and impact, not or, not a trade-off of our well-being for the good work that we're doing. This is where our resources are going to be optimised, where the sacrifices that we make are in balance with the value and the fulfillment that we derive from our work, and the other things that matter to us in life are still in focus and are still attended to. The second principle I'd like to share is that when we consider the causes of burnout and dig into the risk factors and look at the ways of being and working in the health and social sectors, we have the ingredients of absolutely the perfect storm. It makes burnout more of an inevitability, than a possibility, and we need to pay attention to the causes, not just the symptoms. So I'll step through the 5 levels at which risk factors have been identified in burnout research and invite you to consider how many of these levels represent challenges for you. And it could be all, and quite often that is how this resonates for people. So at society, we have these extraordinary enabling technologies, freedom and functionality that brings with us, but it keeps us hyper-connected and on 24/7. We have a culture of busyness where we're working harder and longer, not just hours in the day, but longer working life, years of working life. We've got a social pressure to stay the course. That can be imposed by ourselves, and that can also be imposed by others, in a sense of urgency and demand and need that is ever present. At the system level, I mentioned before the norms and stigma that can exist around mental health issues and challenges when we're vulnerable or struggling at work. So there's some norms in our system that are simply not good for our health. Of course, there's growing demand and complexity of need and practice. There's always more to learn, more to know, more to think about, more to do, and more opportunities for error. And we're working constantly within a state of resource constraint. Quite often we're cobbling together funding from different sources, all with different accountability requirements and goals, and we can feel like a slave to many masters quite often, and pressure to sustain and to spread without funding support for that, or the capacity to attract and retain good people, and our capacity to build and grow our team capabilities. At the workforce level, at that next level, the workplace level, there are 6 factors that have shown to be influencing burnout in the workplace. So workload, whether it's overwhelming and impossible or frustrating, or whether it's manageable, the level of control or autonomy that we have, the level of reward. So are we feeling seen, heard, acknowledged and valued in our work? Our sense of community, whether relationships are positive and mutually supportive and collegiate or challenging. Our sense of fairness, the balance between the demands of our work and the value that we derive, the conditions of our employment and how we're treated. And our values, whether we feel that our personal values are aligned or misaligned with the values in our organisation. You know, the words on the walls and the happening in the halls and how they align. And then in particular work roles, we can be at risk, where we're exposed based on the hours we work, being on call, experiencing trauma, suffering, grief and helplessness, or violence in the workplace. And particular work roles in palliative care, in hospices, emergency services, and also in oncology. And then individual characteristics, which can also be at play. So women are at higher risk of burnout. People who are early in their career, people who are in middle of career and managing, you know, competing priorities usually at home, aging ageing parents, for example, and a diminishing number of years between now and when we would like to retire. Stress at home, financial concerns, where there's conflict between work and family, where someone is socially isolated, maybe has high ideals and a tendency to perfectionism. People who have an external locus of control and are likely to blame others for their well-being and their circumstances. Those who derive their sense of identity and meaning from their work is another risk factor, and that would apply to many people, if not most people working in these sectors. So there will be factors at each of these 5 levels affecting every workplace and every person in these sectors, sometimes multiple within a single layer or multiple levels across that. So hence the perfect storm and why we really need to pay attention to this issue. The third principle I'd like to offer is that burnout begets burnout. So once we've got a certain level of this happening in our workplaces, this is going to increase the risk for ourselves and for others. So thinking about that in terms of the hallmarks of burnout, so emotional exhaustion, depersonalisation and reduced personal efficacy, as I mentioned before, occurring in about 30 to 35% of our workforce. So if we look at these little guys on the slide, about 6 of these people would be experiencing these symptoms at a serious level and others at a lower level. That's a very sort of serious issue when we think about that in terms of the consequences for the individual, for our workplace culture functioning, and the behaviours and absenteeism and turnover and all of those sorts of things, as well as for our patients, carers and communities in terms of their experiences and the quality and safety of care. So now I'd like to turn to 3 mistakes that I think we can make that can precipitate our path to burnout. The first, I believe, and these are mistakes that I put my hand on my heart and subscribe to as being mistakes that I've made in my life as well, is to believe that self-sacrifice is optimal, that anything else would be self-serving or selfish, that it isn't and it shouldn't be about me. Now, how this might manifest is that we might have really blurred boundaries between work and life. We might step on that hamster wheel and pedal madly away, even though we decline. We might say yes, even when we're overwhelmed and overloaded and we know that we can't do what it is that we're agreeing to. And we might not set boundaries and become increasingly distracted over a longer period of time in our day and have that bleeding into our work life, our home life, our sleep time, all of those sorts of things. The truth is, if you're not tending to your energy and well-being, your reserves will drain. And if we think about this bucket, a simple metaphor of a bucket, as your energy and well-being reserves, if they're draining faster than they're filling, they will empty. Full stop. And empty is burnout. And when I was empty, I realised that I had not only just compromised my own well-being, but my capacity to sustain my work, to fulfil my purpose, and my capacity to serve others, including my family. And the truth is that you'll not be martyred for your heroic efforts. You'll just be sad and diminished and have a hell of a battle ahead of you to recover. We have to make different choices to achieve different results. We need to fill our energy and wellbeing reserves and stop and stem the drains where we can. And ideally, perhaps not feeling quite so possible just at the moment in terms of the times that we're living in, but ideally to get to the point where we've got reserves in our bucket that enable us to remain resilient in the face of challenges in work and our personal lives that will inevitably rise as a part of just the human condition. The second mistake is to believe it is out of my control. So I'm helpless to change this and I just need to accept that this is my lot in life. And there's some important symptoms of this mistake. We might feel powerless and relinquish our power to others. We might surrender to, accept and normalise things that are unacceptable, conditions that are unacceptable. And we may get caught in a cycle of blaming and resentment and disengagement. And the risk could be that you're on a path to fundamental and devastating regret And feeling a lack of control is a risk factor for burnout. So some things are absolutely outside of your control, but much is within your control and your influence. And I would challenge you to think about taking control of what you can, and also think about where you're expending your energy and your emotions. And if a lot of it is being spent on things that are outside of your control, perhaps choose to let some of those go and focus where you can make a difference in your life and the lives of others. Oh, mistake number 3, I don't have the time. There's simply not enough time. And when there is the time, I just don't have the energy to take care of myself or to address this in my workplace. The symptoms of this are not tending to our energy and well-being, letting work, other commitments and challenges in life become all-consuming. And it's going to absolutely precipitate that vicious cycle by diminishing our well-being. We might create workarounds and shortcuts to help deal with our lack of time, like more coffee, like skipping lunch, like not eating well, and maybe develop habits that help us to find some short-lived relief when we're really struggling. That could be alcohol, you know, endless scrolling on our phone, or comfort eating, all sorts of things. And of course, all of these things and the stresses that we're facing lead to health issues within ourselves, increased risk. Illness, we can be less proactive around acting on symptoms or concern, because there's always someone else that has greater needs than we have, right? And we put our needs aside. We might become less proactive about our own preventive health and find, you know, difficulty concentrating, then things take longer and that vicious cycle's in action. It's not hard to see how these scenarios can lead to all sorts of flow-on effects, to relationship challenges, conflict, loss of productivity, workplace challenges, staff leaving, absenteeism, presenteeism, the lights are on, but maybe nobody's home. If we want to stay resilient, we need to make conscious choices. And I mean this at an individual, at a team, at a workplace, as leaders, and in our sector as a whole, to invest time and energy in tending to what matters to us and to thinking strategically about how we address this problem. So many of the things that have supported my recovery have not taken a lot of time. They've been simple and quick hacks and mindset shifts that have actually set me free. Excuse me. The sorts of things around trading, taking care of your body and your mind, setting boundaries around work to enable you to spend more quality time with your loved ones, to enable you to be more focused and productive when you are at work, valuing your sleep and thinking about whether you're trading it for work time and what are the implications of that. And then thinking about the simple investments in your well-being and your energy. And I guess what I would like to challenge you with is that whilst compassion for others is a cornerstone and a philosophy of our work in the health and social sectors, and probably the reason why you get out of bed and keep getting out of bed each morning despite the challenges we're facing, this is not what is going to sustain you. What if the most powerful thing you could do in order to be of service to others is in fact to put yourself first? I know that can go right against the grain, right? But if you don't, you limit your capacity to sustain your efforts. You limit the impact you make without question. This is going to limit the connection between your work and your sense of purpose and meaning and identity. And then if you're not showing compassion to yourself, you can also be affecting the lives and work of others in a negative way and become part of the problem, not the solution. So I would argue very strongly not to wait for someone to rescue you. You've got to rescue yourself. Now there's good news, of course, just in case I've kind of sent you on a downward spiral there. We are having conversations about this. Partly this is being precipitated by COVID, but it would be a fundamental mistake for us to think that this was not a very, very serious issue before COVID. It's great that we're talking about it. It's not going to be eliminated when the virus is brought into control. So let's seize this opportunity and think very meaningfully about how we actually tackle this as a problem that won't have a simple solution and needs a very strategic approach for individuals and teams and organisations and our sector as a whole. So it's being acknowledged as a serious issue, we need to be thinking about more than wellness spaces and yoga classes. This needs to be personal, and it needs to take into account what matters to each of us as individuals, as well as the circumstances of our work and our life. And the nice thing is you don't have to work this out on your own, and there are a lot of resources that are being developed in a lot of areas and organisations that are now focusing on this. So I just very briefly, as I finish off, I just wanted to share this evolving body of work that I alluded to at the start, and to share the beliefs and my vision for transformational change that have emerged from this work so far. So here's what I believe. I believe that resilient health and social sector organisations create better health for all. And I also believe that our most precious resource is our people. And the focus of my work is on growing resilience, as was mentioned. And this looks like passionate, compassionate people with a strong social purpose who are thriving, healthy and fulfilled in their work. Resilient people in resilient teams, and leaders who model and foster resilience in the workplace. And my vision is for us to have vibrant, thriving, sustainable organisations that are equipped to tackle the health and social challenges of our time, not just tinkering around the edges, not where there's a whole lot of things that are just too hard because we're constantly declining and we're up against it, but where we're actually able to take on those challenges. And so my mission that I've chosen to take myself on is to create a resilience revolution. So to inform, educate, support and empower leaders, teams and individuals in the health and social sectors, to transform the well-being of their workforce and create new norms. Norms where resilience and impact are equally valued, routinely measured and continuously improved. And to do this with values around wholehearted service, integrity, joy and freedom. So just briefly, thinking about where we are at the moment, I think it's important to recognise where we are at the moment in terms of being in the midst of COVID, and that at the moment, the best we could probably think about doing is to hold and to manage and to get through, to thinking about ways that we can restore where possible, to release stress and relieve stress where possible, to rest and reflect and refuel when we can. But then hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, we have a capacity to move into a new phase of restoring and rebuilding and creating the foundations for our future success, where we gather insight, we shift mindsets, we build energy, we create new habits. There you go. I'll have to come up with a definition for that too. New habits and new tools and new metrics that we measure in our workplaces, where we shift to reframing then and re-energising. So bringing this new normal to life in our workplaces, resilience and impact as our culture and our focus for resilience in individuals, leaders, teams and organisations. And then we shift eventually to reviewing and refocusing, where we've got this integrated into our systems and processes, where we monitor, measure and track our progress, where we focus on maintaining our resilience, and we also continuously improve and have ongoing development. So I've tried to squeeze a whole lot into today's presentation. I hope there's been something in there of value. I just wanted to bring attention. I do publish a weekly blog called Wholehearted, where I try and share a simple tip or strategy. It's designed to be a quick read, an easy read. I know everyone's under the pump, with really practical, implementable ideas and learnings. And the blog tomorrow really focuses on the challenges that we have at the moment. So it starts a 7-week series around stress management, and I'm bringing a series of things that I learned at that conference a couple of weeks ago into a 6-week sort of stress relief challenge, and I'm sharing each week something that takes 60 to 90 seconds that's been proven to release stress that you might like to try. And then if you find that it brings you relief, then you can add it to your toolkit and use it to help manage stress in your life. And then in November, I'm going to be launching the Resilience Revolution Community of Practice. So enrolling my first cohort of resilience champions in November, and we'll do some onboarding in December and get started in January of working through training and sharing resources to implement change in the workplace, some group challenges, information sharing and troubleshooting. and opening that once a year to bring some more people to join that community, and to work with obviously leaders to sponsor this work and to make sure that there is adequate time given to this important change that needs to happen in our workplaces. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention today, and invite you to get in contact with me if you have any comments you'd like to make, or if you'd like to connect with me.